So big welcome to everyone to today's class. We're looking at critical thinking again today, but we're looking at the specific setting of critical thinking in groups and teams. And you may remember times in your schooling where you've had a group and it's not gone so well, because one person has been expected to do all the work, and whatever work you do, you don't get credit for. Or you may have had some great group work experiences in which you have been credited for the work that you have done and you've really enjoyed it. So we're going to talk about group work, and one of the things that we're going to really emphasize is that it's inevitable that you're going to have to relate to others and work in groups with people at times. You can't do it all on your own. And it's much better if you understand the benefits that come from groups and teams and the ways you can teach students to work more effectively with others in groups and teams. And it's also better if you understand some of the difficulties and ways they can be overcome. Let's begin with a Bible reading from 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul writes that just as the body has many parts, and so it is as Christians in a church or any organisation, we're baptised by one Spirit into one body. Some may come from a cultural background of Jewish, others from a Gentile or Greek or Roman. Some may be slaves working for others. Others may be free. But we all have the one Spirit of God that we drink. We're all part of a body, just like the parts of the human body, where the foot may say, I'm not the hand, I've got a different role. Or the relational person or the task person may say, I'm not the other. That's not a reason to stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, I'm listening, I'm not the eye, or the eye should say, I'm seeing, I'm not the ear, the whole body is not just one part. We work together. And so it is in any organisation that you're a part of or any stage of life that you're a part of. It's so important to recognise those that can feed you with other viewpoints, other ways of seeing things, and can help you. As the Message Bible says, your body has many parts, but no matter how many parts you can name, it's exactly the same. And it's exactly the same with the church and with Christ. And so we need to say goodbye to our partial, piecemeal lives. I want you to think about how all this makes you more significant, not less. A body isn't just a single part blown up into something huge. It's all the different but similar parts arranged and functioning together. And in the Bible, there are many other passages that speak about the importance of working in groups and teams with others. Don't neglect doing good and sharing with others, loving one another. Recognise we need one another, but also there are passages that talk about the nature of the individual who takes responsibility for their own decisions and lives and doesn't lean too heavily on others and abrogate their responsibility. So finding the balance between being accountable to yourself and maintaining healthy relationships with others is important. And these are skills that we need to be teaching in the classrooms. We need a mixture in our classrooms of individual learning and also group learning, and we need to help our students to develop these skills. We need to recognise that there can be politics and power involved. There can be students who are louder than others, and there are students who understand power dynamics that are taking place in any organisation or classroom. So let's open with a prayer as we pray. Heavenly Father, we ask for your guidance and blessing, that we might become better teachers, and help us to appreciate that we're members of a team in a school or in an organisation or a workplace or a family at home. We have colleagues and administrators, support staff, parents and students. Recognise that these are all valuable and that they all contribute to the education of those who are in our care. And we pray that you grant us wisdom to work together with others in harmony. And may we always remember that we're called to serve and not to be served, and that our highest purpose is to help our students to become their best. And to do this, we often need to work with others. We pray that you'd guide us as we learn about these skills and how we can pass them on to others, we pray. Amen. So what's your experience of groups when you're in primary and secondary school and tertiary coming through, Daniel? What are the tough times with groups, and what are the better times that you've had with groups? Or maybe when you've tried group teaching, when you've been teaching in a school setting. What's your experience, Daniel?
I've had the whole rainbow, I feel. I had some terrific group tasks and assessments that I was part of in high school that I remember really fondly. And I think as a teacher, I was able to use group work relatively well. I think one thing that I was mindful of, and I think this is something that we're all relatively familiar with in terms of its importance, is thinking about the benefits of mixed ability groups for tasks. The other thing as well is that I would use groups often in a kind of jigsaw task setting, and so I think that works quite well. I just always made sure that and I say to my students as well, if you're doing a jigsaw task, you always want to make sure that you as the teacher have all the information needed that the groups are going and collecting, because if you get one group struggle, it means that the whole class will might not get the information they need when that group comes back and reports. So I think I've been able to use groups effectively because I've had some really great advice from teachers who were mentors to me and really helped me in terms of my teaching. So I've been really fortunate in that regard to learn from them and implement a lot of the strategies that they used. I would say my less than favorable group work experiences probably came when I was at university. I had a few experiences where I think some people do more work than others. I had one memorable experience where I was in a group of 4. 2 people did hardly anything, and then the other person did a lot of work, but unfortunately, a lot of that work involved copious references to Wikipedia. So it was a double-edged sword there. They put a lot of time and energy into it. So that was an interesting experience for sure. So I think we've probably all got experiences on different ends of the spectrum. Do you have any particular?
Just commenting on those thoughts is that reading the scholarship on group work says that it is so valuable, important, because it exposes you to these very weaknesses and strengths. And this is the real life, real world that you face, is that there are people who will do things differently to you. There are people who will see things differently. And part of the challenge of life is to learn how do you work with difference. And one of the dangers of individualistic work is that you overvalue your narrow way of seeing things and doing things. And group work helps to challenge that. Even when it doesn't work, it's still valuable because you're learning about dynamics, you're learning about all of these different strategies. And as you say, you're even learning about this reward side of things, whereby the whole nature of rewards. Should the whole group be rewarded? And this is the question with socialism and capitalism. Or should an individual be rewarded? You're learning something about the dynamic of society and politics in this whole process. And so, like you, there have been groups that have not worked so well, but some of the most memorable experiences I've had have been informally after a class where I've talked to someone and they've said, what about this? What about that? And years later, I can remember the informal comment more than I can remember the class sometimes.
Yeah.
Again, that's an informal group occasion whereby you're talking about class material or even something not so related, but you're still working with others in the group. And so I think this points out the incredible value of group work to us, is that it's not only building information, giving us other perspectives, but it's also challenging us emotionally. It's challenging us relationally. It's actually doing a lot of dynamic things that we could overlook. And it's very easy to take the easy way out and you could be in a staff meeting of 100 people and you can keep quiet. Well, it's just not working. But that's important to understand, that a group of 100 people doesn't necessarily work. And so it's important that we remember these occasions when groups don't work, and that we also consider times when groups do work well. So the most significant example of group work not working well, I think, is the Space Shuttle Challenger. And so with the Space Shuttle Challenger, these 7 people were sent up in the space shuttle, and there were a number of people noticed along the way that if the temperature, I think, was too low, I think that was what happened or something, and different things could go wrong, and people had noticed it. But acting as individuals, they never spoke up. And so the space shuttle goes up, has these difficulties, and it doesn't come down so well. So if you ever felt pressured to do something, you're part of a team and the group goes along and you wonder whether you should speak up or not. So there's politics in decision making. And even you write an essay, you've got to decide, do you give this view or not? And you could be writing about evolution and creation. I applied for a job once, and they said, a student asks you about evolution and creation as a chaplain, what do you do? And I looked over to one side and I could see staunch creationists who didn't believe in evolution. And I looked over the other side and I saw someone or 2 people who were staunch evolutionists who felt the world was 13.7 billion years old. And I thought, panic, panic, what do I say? And we're faced with these dilemmas, political. How do you balance these? So I thought about it for a few seconds, prayed about it, and I said, I believe it's important to value the diversity of opinions, and that we should respect one another's views, and the creationists should respect the evolutionists and the evolutionists. And I got the job. So it shows the value of speaking up at times, but you have to be aware of your audience. And in any group, you do have these diverse interests. And in the 1986 Challenger, it takes off, and 73 seconds after taking off, kaboom, bits go flying everywhere. And when they looked at the reason for it, people had known that it was going to happen, but they didn't speak up. People who had manufactured the parts, etc. And so 73 seconds later, these people lost their lives because they knew that the O-rings were sensitive to the cold and they wouldn't work below 53 degrees. It was 36 degrees on the morning, and it was not going to work, and that the fuel would leak and the whole thing would explode. So that's an example of group work that didn't work. And you may be able to think, oh, that's a bit like my class at times, or my school, or my church, or my country. And then there are other times when group work works absolutely marvelously. But every situation, even the Challenger disaster, people can learn from, and people lose their lives for that. So a great deal of our thinking isn't just individual, it takes place in groups. And so we need to be aware of the nature of group work and the challenges of group work. And in previous classes, we've asked students to think about what groups influence you. I know I've attended various churches, Anglican, Catholic, Protestant, and there's dynamics going on there. And you've got to think about who's present when you make certain statements. And so in a church, how high you raise your hands has to do, you've got to look around which sort of people are here. And if you're in one type of church, the less you move your hands, the more spiritual you are. And you're in another type of church, the more you move your hands, the more spiritual you are. You've got to be aware of the group that's around you, don't you? And so group is part of what's around us and how we understand things. Now, people in the 1800s were very focused on groups. You went along with the group, you marched to war as a group. And then in the 1900s, we moved towards mass manufacturing, industrialization. There's a whole historical process. And through the 1960s or so, there was a move towards individualism. And you may even see that in some of your schools. They may celebrate the individual runner who comes first at the cross country and those who come second or third. And then there may be another class where they celebrate that which is the very best in the class. But you might also have other teachers who are saying, look, it's not just about the one who comes first or second or third. It's about everyone participating and sharing one with another. I don't know what sort of what sort of person are you, Daniel? Do you like both, celebrating the top literary person, or do you celebrate everyone in the class? And with your children, do you celebrate the oldest? And
I like to think I try and celebrate everyone.
yes.
So, I guess sort of very base example, I love team sports because I think they're a lot harder to, or they can be a lot harder to achieve something with, because there are multiple individuals that have to work in concert with each other. And, I wouldn't say that I think in my teaching of English and literary theory, I wouldn't say that I venerate one author or theorist. I would like to think I move the spotlight around a little bit.
Yes, yes. Now, it's interesting that the teacher, Dr. Arnold at Rugby School, wanted to come up with some way of promoting at his school teamwork. And so he came up with a set of rules, Thomas Arnold, for the students throwing a ball backwards as they ran forwards. And it took off, and it became known as his school was Rugby School. And the rules became known as the Rugby School rules. And even here in Australia, we still use Rugby School rules, which were designed to promote teamwork and designed to promote this idea that you cooperate together with someone before you bowl them over. And there's the other side. But it's interesting that team sport is often very promoting, and the same in your classroom. When you have a team activity, you're promoting cooperation and a number of other skills there. So I like what you say there. Cultural studies reminds us that some countries are a lot more oriented towards collectivist team approaches, and others a lot more oriented towards individualistic approaches. And you might think, if you've got students in your class, half of which come from Asia and they're oriented towards honouring their parents, and half come from the USA, or a country that honours individuals, then you've got to think through how are we going to help one another to understand the diverse cultural backgrounds that we come from, and how we're going to work with collectivism on the one hand and individualism on the other. So individualism often focuses on the identity of the one, and this has developed as a trait over the last 500 years or over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. The individual is the hero, the great man idea of someone who's a great hero who leads us. And then there is the collective approach. So collectivist cultures throughout Asia and other areas, they celebrate honouring parents, honouring tradition, honouring the past, as opposed to individualist countries. And so again, it's important to be aware that the way groups operate, they'll have a different approach if you come from a different culture. Daniel, why do groups sometimes cause us so much pain? We want to encourage group work. We give them a group assignment, and was it cause so much pain sometimes?
Because we all have different ways of thinking and doing things. And I think for anyone who's recently married, or can think to maybe when they first got married, or even first moving out of home and living with roommates. One thing that comes up is you realize that you've been raised differently. So, you might have different habits. Your habit might be, as soon as, I think I've mentioned this in a previous week, but as soon as you've finished eating, you take your plates and cutlery and you wash it up. It might be that there is a particular way that a certain room needs to be kept in order, or something like that. So at a very rudimentary level, from roommates, or first moving in together with your spouse, you recognize that you have different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking. And so I think group work is really beneficial because it exposes us to different ways of thinking and doing things, but it's also why it's a challenge, because I think we're presented with the reality that there are different ways other than our own. And sometimes that can be frustrating because we have a particular path that we want to go down. And sometimes the group collectively decides to go a different way. Or someone else might be going down their road and you think, why on earth are they doing that? Why can't they just do it the way I would do it? And they might be thinking the same thing about you. They probably are.
And school dynamics is important. That is, it's important when you go into a new school that you realize there are going to be teachers from different backgrounds and cultures. Some will, it's easy to get along with those who think like you, but there are other teachers who have different ways of doing things. And one of the big differences, I think, is some are incredibly ordered. They line everything up. And then there are others, I was going to say art teachers or whatever, but drama teachers, who are very creative. And so when you have these different teachers working with each other, they need to learn ways to work together. And that's what group work in a classroom is also teaching the students, how to work with students who have diverse backgrounds, diverse ways of doing things. So in teaching or any other group activity, you can develop, I think, strategies. As you said before, Daniel, it's important if you're running a group work activity, have as much clarity as you can about what is being done, why it's being done. Without that, the group work is going to meander. It's not going to go so well. Have as many resources as you can. So if you've got glue and paint and card and you've got clarity about, you can have 1 sheet, 2 sheets of this card, etc. As much clarity, as much resource, all of that helps the students. And as well, clarity about roles. And so if you say there is 1 student who will be required to speak, you need to elect that student. There will be a different student who's required to take notes. There'll be another student who is required to collect this or that. And so if you allocate the different resources and be clear about the grading, and you don't always grade, but if you're grading, be clear that I think it's best when each individual student gets a grade for what they have done. Of course, if it's true group work, you might also want to give a portion of the grade, which could be 20 or 30% for the total group work as well. And that rewards building the team and the group going together. So I think as much information, resource and clarity as you can will give you success. Remember, there will be annoying people and slackers. There will also be good people who are competent. People fear group work because of lost control, loss of certainty. Everyone likes to be in control in a group. You're not in control. So some people will dislike group work, and we need to help overcome that. And there can be ways that you can help develop a positive culture amongst your group. Think about it. If your group has an opportunity at some stage to have a coffee or a cake or whatever and sit round, and so you might build some social rewards and social promotion of your group into the whole experience. So instead of it just being focused on task, it could also be focused on what's a way in which they could socialize and relate more easily together. And there will be groups where people will say they want to drop out, they're unavailable. Some will actually want to destroy the work of other members of the group to promote themselves. And so it's important to understand all of these different dynamics that are going on in the group. Remember, in a group, there will be personality types, and there'll be people who've got all of these different approaches. There'll be individualists who want to do it themselves, and there'll be others for various reasons who've got skills at working with others. Some come from individualist cultures, some from collective cultures. But like we read from the Bible reading, we've got to bring the parts together, the ears and the eyes and the different parts, they've got to work together. Otherwise, we're not able to work together. And society is like that. And an organization is like that. And we've got to learn not only to do things, but how we can work with others to get things done. Now, not all groups are teams. So a working group, yes, you've got a leader, but sometimes in a team, you might want to share different roles. One person might lead the organizational side, another one might lead the information gathering side, another one might lead the oral presentation, another one might lead the PowerPoint and visuals. So you can actually have one leader and you can have shared leadership. You can have one person accountable as the head of the group. And unfortunately, in many places, you often have one person accountable. In a school, who's the one accountable person? Probably the principal. If things go well, they're celebrated, or the year level coordinator, etc. And even in your class, you might have a class captain, you might be the class teacher. Do you want to celebrate the one individual, or do you want to celebrate everyone who is a member? And you can think through ways that you can celebrate everyone who's a person. The group purpose may be the same as the organizational mission, but you might have a sub-purpose there. You might have individual products where you produce the visuals, someone else produces the audio, someone else produces the speaking, and they might get marked on that. Or you might put it all together and get marked on it all together. You might focus on efficiency and getting things done quickly, or you might focus on being open-ended and bringing forward the ideas. You might want to focus on whether we influence others or whether we're accurate. What are the parameters? So what's the rubric that you're going to use? So I think clarity is so important, because certainly you will have slackers who are great at encouraging and speaking, and then you'll have those who are doing the hard yakka, and then those who are just being pulled along. Daniel, your thoughts for making groups work well, some strategies that can help us with this challenge of group work.
Yeah, I mentioned before, I guess from the teaching perspective, the mixed ability groups, but I think an interesting thing to think about is the reality that we as teachers will have to work in groups with our colleagues. And so I think some useful strategies there are to try and early on list or ascertain what people's interests and strengths are, and maybe areas they may not be as confident in, because I think that gives people a sense of control, a sense of ownership about the task, and you can play, the group's mission or objective according to these strengths, these interests. Sometimes people will even want to work in an area that they are weak on because they want to improve. But then you might have to say, this is a really important task and we've got a really strict deadline. Maybe let's not do that. Maybe let's give it to the person whose strength that is. But I think that's a good way of not only making people feel like they are heard and they are valued, but actually quantifying how that group can work together with everything that they bring to the table to divide and conquer. Because that's often what you'll have to do as a group, is divide a particular task and conquer it. So I think that's a really effective way to do it when we are participants in a group. Having checkpoints as well is really important. So implementing smaller, and do this as a teacher as well, particularly for group assessments, have checkpoints where, you're basically scaffolding up to the objective itself, or the final objective, where, you've got all these checkpoints, and it can help you kind of take this task on one chunk at a time and work your way up.
I like those suggestions there, in that you have to make a decision. Are you going to build existing strengths or new skills? And one of the new skills is how to develop skills with working with one another. And so one of the things you might take some time to talk about is, how can we develop our skills in working with one another? And one of the things that I really value is when the teacher doesn't just tell you, this is the way you work with one another, but asks the students, what do you think are some strategies? And then quietly goes around, and each one will get a opportunity to say, I think this would work. And then they'll say, so-and-so never listens to me. I would value it if they did. And then so-and-so doesn't work with me. One of the interesting developments in prep and year 1 or 2 is when you get a mute student who will not speak. Have you heard of those, Daniel?
I have. I've never encountered one at the secondary level, but I've had friends who have had mute students. And I know it's been, or students who are mute, and I know it's been certainly a challenge for them. And I have to admit that based on my experience and being, in the secondary space where students who are mute are far less common, I have zero experience. So if someone came to me and said, what would you do with a student who is mute? I'd really have to go away and think about it and probably do some research and try and come up with some strategies. But I know it can be really tricky, but sometimes beneficial, in that I know that those peers or those friends of mine talked about how it made them rethink some of their teaching.
And I was talking to a primary school teacher. I was talking to my wife. She's had 1 or 2, and also talking to others. And one of the things that they did once was the student would not speak, but they had 4 assessment items where they had to give a class presentation. And so the student was just not going to graduate and go on to the next level. So what they did was they asked the mother to get the student to speak at home, and recorded the student speaking at home. When they came to class, they only had to stand next to the video of them delivering the speaking. And they stood there, and then they were asked questions, but they were too embarrassed to say anything in a school setting or a class setting. And when they were asked questions, they'd go, etc. Too afraid to say a word, but they still got their grade based on the video that was done at home. Because at home,
That's awesome.
when on the farm, they were able to run around with their pets and they were free, they could express themselves. But anywhere off the farm, they would go quiet and would not say anything. And so mute students, shy students, one of the big challenges I found is that half your class have some academic ability and can write, and then the other class don't necessarily have academic ability. And again, if you do a video recording, audio recording, you might discover that the other half of the class who are not so good at the writing can be good at this. Students get embarrassed very easily, closed down very easily, and they often misbehave when that happens. And if you can give them alternative opportunities for expression, such as oral expression instead of written expression, such as visual expression. And I find amazing, you go around the class and you discover out of 20 students, you got 3 or 4 who only want to draw things. Even when they're not supposed to be, they're drawing when they're supposed to be, and then there's the others who just want to talk, and then there's the others who are happy to work with words and write words. And so we need to work with the different students, and at times we need to encourage them. They've got to also do some of the other things that they don't find so comfortable. It's all part of being a team and recognizing we all contribute in different ways. What are the advantages of group decision making? Firstly, there are more people to interact with and a greater diversity of views. So the advantage is you increase diversity of viewpoints, increase diversity of age, gender, culture, background, interests, skills, personality. This diversity is incredibly valuable. And if you work with church and church groups, value the diversity, because one of the great dangers is in any group, the person in charge appoints people who have the same interests, skills, socioeconomic background as themselves. So whenever you bring in people from a different background, then you have different perspectives, and that can help design things. Socially, of course, our world tends to be designed by males of a certain age, maybe 25 to 35, and everything else gets left out. Anything that's made tends to be designed by this sort of groups. So when you engage the help of a number of people from different backgrounds, different ideas, much better. It's like the legs on the tripod. If they're all close together, then it's not going to be as stable. The further apart they are, the more stable. And I say to the students, when you're writing an essay, your essay is a group project in a sense that you might bring together 10, 12, 15 or more scholarly resources from scholarly people. And the more diverse scholarly resources, the better the viewpoint. We talk about evolution and creation. A reasonable essay might have both viewpoints in it, because the legs of the tripod then are a fair way apart, and you're showing an awareness of diverse viewpoints, diverse opinions. And so certainly that's one of the great points about group work, is that it allows for diversity of viewpoint. Group work helps promote greater interest and participation from all of the different members. It's very easy in a staff room or a classroom, one person dominates, or a sports team, but group work gives everyone to contribute, an opportunity to contribute in some way. Group work helps create greater understanding. So one person's more into the maths and the science, another into the humanities. They all bring a level of understanding. Some might be more pessimistic, some more optimistic. And we find that with the different hats that can be worn, Edward de Bono's model of the different hats is a great system of working with group work. And so Edward de Bono and the six thinking hats, you've then got there, and you could buy the hats, you could cut pictures out, you could print them off your color printer, you could write them up and just say, you've got these different hats that represent different approaches. Someone's going to focus on the facts today. Someone's going to focus on creativity. Someone's going to focus on the benefits. Someone's going to be the negative cautions person. Someone's going to have the heart feelings, and someone's going to have the overall processes involved.
I got to say, I like the rewording of the black hat there to cautions. I think that's a lot more palatable than
Yes.
the critical or the negative, as we often call it. I think I like that, actually.
Yeah. And you do find some people have a negative judgmental approach, whereas others have an optimistic approach. Some people always have a smile on their face. Other people always have a frown on their face. And one of the things that's useful is to get people to try these different, and drama and acting can be useful, where you get people to act out these different approaches and different viewpoints, and sometimes viewpoints and debates. That's another group approach, is to have a debate where different people give their different approaches. So group decisions can really help understand these different positions that people take. Groups can create opportunity for collective contribution. That is, sometimes the biggest decisions and most effective that are made in life is where you have more than one person contributing. And one of the great examples I've seen of that is Jobs and Wozniak invent. And one of the things that it began with was a HP calculator. And Wozniak had this idea that you take a HP calculator, and that you attach a screen to it, and you also attach a keyboard to it. And he went to the people and they said, we don't have room for developing this. And he said, can I go and develop it on my own? But Wozniak really didn't have the idea of the box to put it in. And Steve Jobs said, hey, I've got this idea of a beautiful box. I've got this idea of marketing it, etc. And I think Wozniak, without Steve Jobs, he would have had a great idea, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Whereas Steve Jobs had a great idea about how to package it, market, and put it into a beautiful box. And then he went on to make an iTunes and iPod. And again, Steve Jobs was all about making it look nice and beautiful, whereas Wozniak was all about making the innards of it work. But it's the teamwork between the two that produced the product. And you look at the Beatles or any singers, often it's more than one person makes the team operate. And so in so many examples in technology, music, anything we do in life, you need more than you in order to make it come together and work. What's your experiences in groups, Daniel? When do they work well? When do they work not so well?
I think they tend to work well when I think the common mission or the common goal is important. So I think we see with Wozniak and Jobs, for example, they have a common goal. They each take, they've got a different component, but their goal is the same, to create and market this particular product. And what I find is that sometimes in group work, the assessment is the same, but the goal is different, in that some people's goal might be a really high mark. Some people's goal might be, I just want to get it done. And so I think that's probably the most common denominator I see in terms of group work that either I've been in or that I've run, where everyone is going along the same track, but individuals want to go to a train station further along the line, and others want to go to a train station that's a little bit closer. So in terms of the importance of that, what goal are we actually reaching for here is, I think that's a good thing. And something that I've learned is to kind of signpost early on and say, okay, what kind of standard are we looking for here? And, even thinking outside of assessments, we'll be in groups in our own lives and careers where the reality is that we don't need something perfect. We just need to get something done. It doesn't need to be amazing. It's just, we just got to get it sorted. So, there's no point breaking our backs and losing sleep and energy over something that's not, critically important. So I think that understanding of being on the same page of what are we all hoping for here? What is the actual specific, tangible outcome that we want? I think that's really important.
And it's important to realise that the different members are going to have different goals. That is, some might be worried about the visual appearance of the final poster, the final presentation. Others, not concerned at all. Some might be saying we need to get this done in a short term. Others saying long time is okay. Others might want the end product to look good. Others might say, I want to learn something along the way. Some might want to speak about it. Others want to write about it, sing about it, write poem. But so we're all different, and we all bring different aspects to the one goal. And then it's important, as you say, to be able to sell what is the one goal that we're working towards. For Jobs, he felt that you had to make some financial profit from it. Wozniak felt that, no, we could give it away for free. And he did. He went down to the local computer club and just gave the plans and everything away. And so two very different people, very different goals, and yet they worked together on a project in which they both were able to produce something amazing out of. And so group work, teamwork is about bringing together different people, even though they are different, like the ear and the eye. to bring them together. Group decision making can take advantage of the relationship opportunities. That is, often you can only do things when you work with others that you can't do when you work alone. Group decision making promotes the idea that collective thinking is beneficial. So it reminds us that so much can be done together, and we learn about each other. We learn social skills. We learn about decision-making processes and how they involve. And so they increase the strength of an organisation when it's not just one person, but all of these. And it takes advantage of opportunities that come about. So I encourage teamwork and group work because they bring so many benefits. But in order to do this, you have to clarify the goals, clarify the roles, clarify the resources. You need everything that is going to be required in order to work together. And you have to promote a cohesive, happy culture and spirit, and you could do this over having a coffee or something together. Remember also that group decision making does have problems. That is, you may not complete it because you're leaning on others to complete it. You may have different opinions and ideas, and you may consider others to be irrelevant and they're not what you want. The group size is important. The more people, the more diverse opinions, and the more challenging it is. If you've got 10 people, it can take you in 10 different directions. How do you handle that, harness that? How do you work together? Is it democratic? Do we vote? Is one person in charge? Some people refuse to share their perspectives. They're worried about losing. One of the things I found, Daniel, is that in life, I think the more you share, the more effective you are. And even with computers, one of the things that Jobs decided not to share things. Whereas over in Windows, they decide to share it. And then over in open source, they decide to totally share it. And you see that with their phones. And you got these two different perspectives. One is, do we share? Do we hold it to ourselves? Resistant people who hold things to themselves can slow down decision making, can slow, whereas others can decide to roll with the punch, accept what occurs. Different people in groups can have different priorities. And some, as we said, want things to look good, others not worried about that so much. And this means that there's going to be different ideas about how things will unfold. The choice of the group and its members can also come up with things that are different. And we see that in churches, some wanting to be more academic, some wanting to be more spiritual. And so you start a prayer group, they'll go one way. You start an academic group, that may be different. And so subgroups can have different goals to the main group. Groups can reduce accountability because people can lean on the other members and say, oh, they'll decide it. And you can get slackers in the group. Group decision making can result in the overuse of authority by one person or group. You get pushers in the group who push their own opinion. Group can cause everyone to see themselves as the leader, but then they realize they can't all have the power, and so then they can give up because they're all wanting to be the leader. So there's dynamics that we need to consider. One of the fascinating models that I saw with groups and decision makings is Tuckman's theory of group development. Have you seen this, Daniel? This idea by Tuckman is that you form a group very easily. You get together, you shake hands, and you're going forward, and you have a few guidelines and rules, and you mention the goal, etc. And then you get along the way a day or two or sometime later, and you suddenly realize we're different. We're pulling in different directions. We interpret the rules and the guidelines in different ways. And so you have a battle, and that's called the storm. One of the solutions that Tuckman suggests is the norms solve the problem. And so the clearer you can establish the norms before you get the group going. So you say this group is going to be working together for this particular length of time. This is the goals. These are the resources. These are the roles that members will play. Speak up, tell us what needs adjusting. The more you can have norms back in the forming stage, the easier it'll be. And then when you have a problem, the more you can re-establish norms and say, isn't this the way? Oh, you didn't fit in there. What if you went here? So you make adjustments and you set up new norms. If you don't work through the new norms well, some might go silent, some might back out, and you may go back to thinking we got a nice form, but you'll have another storm. If you work out the norms well, then you'll go on to performance, where there'll be trust and atmosphere and flexibility. And then eventually you'll have to adjourn and say, now we can step back, relax a bit, we've got other people, etc. So these 5 stages, forming, storming, and then norming, remind us of the values of clarity and norms there. What are your thoughts on Tuckman's model of group development? Do you think it would work, Daniel? And what do you like?
Yeah, I hadn't actually encountered Tuckman's theory until this particular week. And I think it was really interesting because it actually made me go back and think back to the groups that I'd been involved in and actually kind of locate some of those different stages in my own experience. So I think at the very least, I can see the practical reality or implication of Tuckman's theory as well. I think an interesting thing to consider is the extent to which groups are formed and become unformed and reformed. You know, if we think about things like working groups, for example, or in the workplace, the reality that you would need to come together as a team to do some tasks and then come back. And then, you know, you finish a task and then maybe a month later, there's another group task. So what might my thought was, I wonder what that model might look like when the same members of that team, you know, come back for another task. Do they go through some of those stages a bit quicker than they did last time, I wonder?
I like the way in which this talks about the dynamics, as you're saying, Daniel. That is, there can be steps along the way, and so you can break down the total task into a series of steps in which you could measure them, and you could give feedback along the way. And so I saw a design class the other day where they were making a timber box. But instead of grading the final timber box, if you were to grade the design stage, and then you were to grade the component stage where they cut it out, and then you were to grade where they did the initial construction, and then you were to grade the final construction. I think this series of steps along the way gives a lot more feedback. It gives a lot more goals, because one of the dangers, I think, is if you just say it's the final product, some people just put it off for weeks.
Yeah.
But if you're saying, look, at the end of each week, we have a goal, and you might give a project that they're working on. And again, rather than say the final project will be graded, if you say there will be a grade given, and you give a grade at the end of every day, and you can actually say, you know, this is cumulative, what you get.
Absolutely. And
And
I
we've
think
done.
oh yeah, I was going to say, I think as well, you know, one thought that comes to mind in thinking about assessing something that's physical as well, with the timber box, for example. You know, I know that this analogy would work for more theoretical things, but just as an example, I think there are some foundational elements of that assessment that need to be done, you know, those checkpoints that need to be done in order for the final product to be the best it can be. You know, there are some things in life that, yes, you could try and skip straight to the end and deliver a product, and it might look as good as if you'd done all the checkpoints, but it might not have the significance and the longevity. You might have missed critical information, and from a, you know, physical product standpoint, it might not have that longevity. You know, an example that came to mind is when you're building a house, you need, you know, depending on what you're building. A friend of mine is building a house at the moment, and the builder didn't have some of the waterproofing inspected, and they are facing a dilemma at the moment where the inspector is saying, well, you know, I wasn't able to inspect it at the appropriate checkpoint, and I'm not going to approve it. I can't inspect it now, or the exterior work's been done.
Wow.
So you need to demolish? Do you have to demolish it then? Like, how does that work? So
Yeah. And it's interesting,
that's not my problem.
if you apply this to mathematics, I know maths teachers will often give a grade for the working out and a grade for the answer. And
Yeah.
so you don't just get a grade for the answer, you get a grade for displaying the working out. And so if you give 50% for the working out, even if you get the wrong answer, you still get a half grade because you have shown the working out, but you made just a little elementary slip up. But if you got the answer because you copied it off the person next to you, you still only get a half grade, and you may not even get a grade at all. And same with science. It might not just be the final product of your science experiment, but it might be the design of the science experiment. It might be the carrying out of the science experiment and the final presentation of the write-up. And so there could be a series of steps along the way. Writing an English story. It might not just be the final story, but it can be the draft, and it can be 2 or 3 drafts along the way. So
where's the character development or the plot points that, you know, swivel and
yeah. So I think all of that relates to the teamwork side of things as well. Have steps along the way in that which you give. Tuxman's model reminds us that the way groups work together depends on how they handle previous meetings together. If they've had happy previous meetings, then they're going to have happy future meetings. If they've not had such happy previous meetings, then you need to think about, do we need a meal out? Do we need some way of building happy experiences? How do you handle conflict when there is difference? And so you need to think through, what are the strategies? And is it a healthy handling of conflict whereby you go silent? Is an unhealthy approach, or do you encourage everyone to express their views in a safe space, which we think is a much healthier way to handle differences? And then with the norms, who draws up the norms? How do you say that we need new norms? How do you change your norms? How do you develop norms that promote cohesion, sharing, trust, creativity, developing new skills? And so each stage helps us to move towards better performance, and then we can conclude it. And so we need to consider the group size. We need to consider the area that we're working in. Can we have more groups, less groups? Will that work better? I like the pair share approach, where the group is just 2, in that both can express. And I like getting students to write down their own views, because when you've got a group of 1, then they are all expressing themselves in some way, but they're not necessarily, they're only getting feedback from themselves. So I like to work with 1s and then pair share, and then to work with larger groups, and then with the whole group. So to make groups work, in general, assign students to groups rather than allowing them to self-select. So that's one strategy, though I think you can try both. You want a group that works as a cohesive whole. You want people who get to know others who are different to themselves. So often we want to mix up the groups, and you never know, lasting friendships can be built when you start new gatherings together. Strategies for making groups work: don't just grade the final product, have the steps along the way being graded. To increase accountability, ask for progress reports, and do give clarity at the beginning as much as you can, and as well give further clarity as you go along. Do start with positive feedback. So give as much encouragement, excitement at the beginning. Do make public feedback. That is, this group's doing well because this group's doing well. And we see this with building on the telly, cooking on the telly. There's lots of group activities that you can see there. Don't try and squeeze team projects into too short a time. You might need to give more time. A lot of people have written about some of the theory behind this in terms of cooperative learning and social independence, and even the ideas of Piaget on the ways people develop, and also Vygotsky contribute hugely to this understanding of the ways people learn through cooperation together. So academic benefits involving knowledge and growth and development of academic skills do relate to working in groups with others, in that we don't just learn about ourselves, we learn about how we work best with others. And so this is valuable. It helps develop higher levels of thinking. It helps improve attitudes. It increases the ways in which people learn and value learning. It allows students to analyze problems, to see different perspectives, to realize different ways of doing things. It develops relational skills along the ways, and those who are too shy to ask the teacher, they often have to learn to speak up, to clarify. There's so many benefits there. During the sharing process, more competent students articulate their thoughts, they make connections, they synthesize information, they learn about the benefits of working with others who give them new ideas, but then they sometimes might need some individual time to go and put those down individually as well. It also affects emotion. That is, it can increase appreciation, enthusiasm, motivation, and values. People can become more effective. So there are so many benefits that come from cooperative learning, but I also encourage you to remember that there are also dangers in groups. You can have an illusion of unanimity because someone speaks loudly, unquestioned beliefs because someone dominates. You can rationalize, you can stereotype what's going on in your group and outside. You can self-censor where you hide fears and doubts. And then you can end up with the situation that we mentioned before near the beginning, the Columbia space disaster or lots of other disasters, where as a group, we just accept what the groups say. We need that balance, Daniel, between groups who recognize the value of one another, but also individuals who recognize the importance of speaking up and being accountable one another. So, yeah, I've really enjoyed this. What stood out to you, Daniel?
Yeah, I think probably what stood out to me was, I think, going back and rethinking about the benefits of group work, particularly in terms of diversity. So, I think from a biblical principle, we know that iron sharpens iron, but I think going beyond that as well, talking about people that come from collective cultures versus individualistic cultures, they are going to bring a different perspective. And, it challenged me to think, if I'm ever in a position, where I might be appointing people to certain tasks, or even hiring, for example, to think about the diversity of the people that make up those particular groups. Because the more diverse the group is, the more perspectives and the more experience you're bringing into it. We talked about the danger of groupthink, and I think certainly you can see that in groups when it can just become an echo chamber of everyone in that particular group is of the same mind, of the same demographic, and it's just one track. There's no critical thinking about different ideas or different perspectives. So I think that was probably what really stood out to me, was the importance of group work for getting us to encounter experiences and perspectives and thoughts that are different to our own.
So drawing together, we need groups, but also Bonhoeffer said we need to recognize the importance of the individual speaking up and valuing your own view as well, being an authentic individual. So we do sometimes need to then draw aside on our own and think, do we really believe this? What are we committed to? And then when we come together, we need a safe space where we can speak and say, this is what I'm really committed to. So we need to grow as a group. We need to grow as individuals as well. And if you can have that combination as a teacher, where you're growing as an individual, but you're also recognizing the value of working with others, then you're going to see a lot of value from group work. Hey, that's a great discussion today on groups, Daniel. The benefits of them really encourages me to get out and interact with others. Final thoughts, Daniel?
No, I think ending on Bonhoeffer as well, I think is a poignant reminder, I think, of perhaps an encouragement to be, I think, brave about, if we see something that's illogical or something that's unfair, to speak up. I think we talk about groups in the context of the classroom, but it has wider implications. It has much wider implications in broader society and culture. And I think in using groups in our classrooms, we're actually equipping our students to navigate society later on in terms of understanding and appreciating different perspectives and different cultures and ideas, but also giving them a platform through which, if they see something that doesn't make sense or see something that is unfair, to have that confidence to be able to express that and navigate their life accordingly.
And that's what coming of age and maturity is about, isn't it? And Bonhoeffer writes this book on Christianity coming of age, people as Christians coming of age, when they take responsibility as individuals, but recognise they have a responsibility to work with the groups that are around them as well. And if we can combine that, thinking as individuals with recognising that our thinking is also done within groups that influence us for good and bad, then they're both important. Great time today, Daniel. Thanks, and look forward to catching up next time. Thank you.